shower is possible. Thunderstorms will continue in the north overnight, staying largely dry and warm elsewhere, with a few showers moving into the west after midnight. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me!
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. You're watching GB News. It's just after 6 p.m. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date on GB News. So Salman Rushdie's family have spoken for the first time since he was attacked at an event in New York on Friday. The author's son says he suffered life-changing injuries after he was stabbed. The 75-year-old has now been taken off a ventilator. And Zafar Rushdie says his usual feisty and defiant sense of humour remains intact. The man accused of stabbing him, 24-year-old Hadi Mattar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. Police are investigating a threat made on Twitter to Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling. Miss Rowling expressed her concern following the stabbing of Sir Salman and received a message saying, "Don't worry, you're next." A spokesperson for Police Scotland says they're carrying out inquiries. The tweet has since been taken down. Labour is expected to call for the energy price cap to be frozen at just under £2,000 this autumn as households struggle with the cost of living. In an open letter, 70 charities are urging the Tory leadership candidates, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, to more than double the support for low-income households. The letter warns that families on benefits face a £1,600 shortfall over the coming months, despite already receiving £1,200 from government. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak says he plans to make Britain energy secure, including boosting North Sea gas production. The former Chancellor says he'd legislate to make sure the UK is energy independent by 2045, as he vows to ensure there's no repeat of the looming winter crisis. Well, Business and Energy Minister Greg Hands told GB News a long-term plan is essential.
But that's also why Rishi Sunak has laid out a comprehensive plan for energy security going forward, making sure we're energy independent within a generation. That takes a long time to make changes on energy. It takes a long time to commission nuclear power plants. It already takes 10 years or more to build an offshore wind farm. So you need to have a long-term plan as well. Rishi Sunak has got that in place.
Well, Tory MP Ranil Jayawardeneh, who's supporting Liz Truss in the leadership race, claims there's been scaremongering around energy prices. He also says the Foreign Secretary plans on creating an emergency budget if she wins.
The energy prices are projected at this moment in time. We will know soon, but we don't have the actual figure just yet. So that's a really important point for people. And I do regret that there has been scaremongering from some quarters on this. Second, I do believe that the pause on the energy levy is a really important immediate relief for families with their energy bills, alongside the cut in NI that will help people. But if elected Prime Minister, Liz has also said that she will hold an emergency budget to see what more can be done at that time.
More than 20,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Government figures show 607 crossings were made yesterday. It's the third time the daily numbers exceeded 600 this year. In 2021, a total of more than 28,000 people were recorded crossing the Channel. At least 41 people have been killed and 45 injured after a fire broke out inside a church near Egypt's capital, Cairo. There are fears many of those killed were children. It's understood the electrical fire blocked an entrance to the church in the city of Giza, causing a stampede as 5,000 people gathered there for Mass. Over 1,500 people have been urged to evacuate their homes in Spain as large wildfires sweep through the country. Around 300 firefighters have been sent to the northeast regions to help battle the flames. Extreme hot weather has already caused several wildfires to ravage parts of Europe. And back here, a teenage boy has died after going into the sea at Skegness yesterday. Lincolnshire police have said they received 10 calls within 2 hours reporting people missing on the coast. That as the heatwave continues today, with temperatures reaching up to 32 degrees across parts of the UK. It comes ahead of 3 days of yellow weather warnings for thunderstorms. You're watching GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now it's time for political correction.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, the UK is looking rather warm across England and Wales. Further north, heavy rain and thunderstorms will move across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here's a closer look. A dry end to the day across southwest England with some late warm sunshine. There could be the odd shower, but most places will stay dry. A warm and dry evening's expected in the southeast with some hazy sunshine to end the day. Temperatures will linger in the mid-20s. Most parts of Wales will stay dry this evening with some sunny spells. However, there could be the odd shower later in the day. It'll be a balmy evening across the Midlands with some warm, hazy sunshine. After a hot day, temperatures will stay in the mid-20s throughout the evening. Plenty of sunny spells to end the day across northern England, and it'll feel rather warm. Skies will be a little cloudier along the northeast coast. Thundery showers will continue across Scotland this evening, bringing heavy downpours of rain. Showers will be hit and miss with some drier spells in between. It should be mostly dry and a mostly dry end to the day across Northern Ireland with some bright spells. However, the odd heavy shower is possible. Thunderstorms will continue in the north overnight, staying largely dry and warm elsewhere, with a few showers moving into the west after midnight. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News, and this is the Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison, and today I'm joined right here in the studio by our very own Paul Embry. And in Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster joins us down the line. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we are finally at the midway point of the Conservative leadership race, with Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak battling it out for the keys to number 10. And this week we saw for the first time a cabinet minister publicly switching camps. So Salman Rushdie has been hospitalised after being attacked while speaking at an event in New York State. But it's reported this morning he's been taken off a ventilator and is able to talk again. And the summer of discontent continues, with unions warning that striking drivers are here for the long haul. Well, as ever here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your message read out on the show, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. This is The Political Correction. Well, let's start with Sir Robert Buckland and the news that he has become the first cabinet minister to publicly switch his support from Rishi Sunak to Liz Truss in the Conservative leadership race. The Welsh secretary said Liz Truss was the right person to take the country forward, adding that he listened carefully to both candidates and thought deeply about the issues that moved him and what he wanted to see the next Prime Minister doing. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you here. How much of a blow do you think this is to Rishi Sunak?
I don't think it's a blow at all, to be honest. I don't think this is going to register in the wider leadership campaign at all, Deanna, to be honest. It seems to me to smack of opportunism as much as anything else. It seems to me that one or two cabinet members, including Buckland, are probably looking at which way the wind is blowing and thinking, look, Truss is almost a dead cert now to win, barring any serious mishaps. What does that mean for my future career? What does that mean for any position I might be able to attain in a future government? Is it best to back the horse now before it finishes, before it passes the finishing line? So I suspect that there is some of that going on. In truth, I don't think it particularly reflects well on people when they do it. I think if you're a cabinet minister who's nailed your colours to the mast of one particular candidate and then halfway through the race you say, actually, this other candidate is the better one, even though I don't think there's been any serious misstep by the Sunak campaign, and even though Truss hasn't necessarily, I don't think, given any particular reason to make cabinet ministers do that, then I think probably people will look at you as a bit opportunist and think, well, did you really not think that Sunak was the best candidate when you supported him originally? Are you seriously backing Liz Truss now for any reason other than opportunism? But in terms of the wider campaign, I don't think it's going to register much at all on the Conservative membership. But you'd know that better than I would, of course.
Me, innocent me. Arlene, I sort of saw you nodding along a little bit there. Do you agree with Paul?
Well, I do agree with Paul. I think it does give a headline to the Truss campaign, obviously, because this is the first cabinet minister to switch sides. I don't think he'll be the last. I think, as Paul says, people are now looking at who's going to be the next Prime Minister, who's going to be the next leader of the party, and it's clearly going to be Liz Truss, unless something very dramatic happens. When you see the polling that's out today, again, that confirms that that is the case. And people are obviously looking at what's going on and who they should get behind if they want to be in the cabinet or if they want to have a government job after this election is over. So I think that's what he's doing. He publicly came out and backed Rishi Sunak. He's now thinking he's not going to be Prime Minister, so therefore I need to switch sides if I want to be in government.
So I'm gonna reduce some cynicism here because, you know, I have some of those thoughts myself, but let's take him at his word. Do you think it reflects better on a politician to change their mind based on the evidence in front of them or to kind of stick with their guns? Arlene, I'll come to you first on that.
Well, I mean, I can take your point, yes. If he has genuinely listened to Liz's campaign, if he thinks there has been something that he can really associate with and he's been listening to Rishi and doesn't think that he's going to lead in the way that he first thought, yeah, I can understand that may be a very nice way of looking at it, but I don't think that is the case here. I think he has assessed that Rishi's not going to be the next Prime Minister. I think it would be I mean, I always had a lot of admiration for someone like Theresa Villiers, for example, who stood by her decision to back Andrea Leadsom, even when Andrea in the last campaign, but decided not to run. You'll remember all of that, Deanna. But Theresa stuck by her to the very, very end. And I think there's something to be said for loyalty. And it looks as if, looking at what's going on in the Conservative Party at the minute, that people do value loyalty. I mean, I think Rishi is getting kickback because of how people perceive he was involved in the downfall of Boris Johnson. And people don't like that. And certainly Conservative members, from what I know of them, don't like it either.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, surely, could you not argue that it actually shows good judgment to back the person towards the end, admittedly, who is the most likely to win elections? At the start of the leadership contest, it looked like Rishi would be the most likely to win elections, but now it looks like it's Liz.
No, I think it's unprincipled. I think that the policies of the two camps, of the two candidates, have largely been clear since the outset of the campaign. I don't sense that anything has fundamentally changed in terms of the direction, in terms of the ideology of the particular candidates. I don't think there's been any real justification. There hasn't been a seismic kind of collapse on one campaign and the other campaign hasn't, in my view, set the world alight. I suspect that if the candidates were closer in the polls, if it were neck and neck, then I suspect, I'm not inside his head, so I don't know for sure, I suspect the likes of Buckland would probably not be jumping ship in this way. But no, I think the positions of the candidates have been clear, and this to me smacks more of personal opportunism and career advancement than anything else. Call me a cynic, but politicians, I think, are that way inclined sometimes. I think, by and large, they do try and do the best for the country, whichever side of the political spectrum they sit on. But of course, especially when they're cabinet members, they're interested in career advancement, and this seems to me to have something of that ingrained within it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's stick with the leadership race, because it was reported this week that Rishi Sunak is splashing out on a brand new £400,000 swimming pool. Aerial photos showed construction underway at the former Chancellor's mansion after he and his wife were granted planning permission to build a swimming pool, gym and tennis court. Arlene, is this a really good look, given the cost of living crisis that we're facing at the moment?
Well, you know, part of me says if you have £400,000 and you want to build a swimming pool, well, go ahead and build a swimming pool. That's your money. You've earned it. You can do what you like. But of course, we live in the real world. We know that there is a cost of living crisis. This is the man who wants to not only lead the Conservative Party, but to be the Prime Minister of the whole country. So I think his judgment on the timing of building his new swimming pool is very questionable. And people will look at it and have the politics of envy. Let's be clear about that, because we discussed this back at the time when there was the whole furore about his wife and non-dom status and the fact that he was a very rich individual in his own right. And we talked about the fact that would people want to have a Prime Minister who was so independently wealthy? And I think at the time we said no, because people like to be able to relate to their leaders. They like to see them as one of them. They like them to be authentic. And it's interesting that in the Ashcroft poll that's out this morning, authenticity is one of the things that Liz Truss seems to be able to bring now. And I think that really strikes at the heart of a lot of this. So whilst it shouldn't matter in theory, Deanna, of course it matters. And I think his judgment has been really flawed on this.
Mm-hmm. Paul, on that front, I mean, how much should we be able to separate kind of people's personal lives and their home lives from the politics? I mean, often we try to, and on this show we talk about it, don't we? But when it's something like this, you know, with that level of sort of wealth, given some of the challenges people are facing, is it really possible to separate those two out?
Well, it's symbolic, isn't it? That's the truth. It's the symbolism of it. At a time when the country is going through a cost of living crisis, energy bills are going through the roof, people are struggling to make ends meet, put food on the table, pay their mortgages. And the guy who was until very recently, in charge of the nation's finances seems to be living a completely different lifestyle that is far, far removed from the life of the average voter, and has the kind of wealth, fantastically wealthy he is, and obviously his wife is as well. That really puts him in a different stratosphere in terms of his own lifestyle and his own appreciation of wealth. And I think people will say, look, I mean, frankly, I don't particularly care on a personal level whether Rishi Sunak is building a swimming pool in his garden or not. But I think people are entitled to say, look, if you are going to be the leader of this country during an economic crisis, we're just about to head into a recession, it's really grim times, people are really struggling. And we can see clear evidence that you are not suffering in any way like the rest of us are. You don't understand the pressures that are on us financially. Then are you the person best placed to lead this country? Can you seriously claim that you are in touch with the average voter, that you understand their impulses, their stresses, their demands, their concerns, and so on? And I think that's a hard challenge for Rishi Sunak. I mean, you know, the truth is that I think societies whose leaders have fantastic wealth, when ordinary voters are living in poverty in many cases, are storing up trouble for themselves. I mean, you can look at the Eastern European communist regimes, not that you really had voters in a true sense in some of those countries because they were dictatorships, but actually many of them were overthrown in no small part because of the difference in wealth between some of the communist leaders who had accrued fantastic wealth and lived in palaces and so on, and ordinary people who were standing in bread queues. And I'm not saying we're at that position here in this country, but we're moving to a position where there is that very sharp disparity in wealth potentially between someone who's going to lead the country and people at the other end of the scale. And I think that causes problems in societies.
Well, that's Rishi, but let's talk a little bit about Liz, because campaigners this week have accused Liz Truss of seeking to appeal to a bigoted section of the Conservative Party after her campaign team put out a press release which said she would change woke civil service culture that strays into anti-Semitism. Paul, I don't think of you as one of the most woke individuals that I know. So what did you make of this from Team Truss?
I thought it was a strange comment, actually. I mean, the anti-Semitism thing in particular, I didn't quite understand, and I think that's caused a bit of a confusion, perhaps even within the Conservative Party itself. It may have been an off-the-cuff remark that didn't particularly make sense. The woke thing, the comments about tackling wokeism, well, that's fine. But what I would say, Deanna, is we've heard it all before. We've heard it all before from senior politicians, particularly senior Conservative politicians who, you know, I think understand that millions of ordinary voters don't like the dominant woke culture of our age. They find it thoroughly stifling and suffocating. They find it undemocratic. They find that a tiny minority of people in their views seem to have captured many of our institutions and much of our media and peddle an ideology that so many of us have got no sympathy with. What I would say, however, is it's very easy to make generalised statements about being opposed to woke. We can all do that, but I think the real hard thing is to stand with people who are the victims of that woke culture. So when people are cancelled, or when people lose their jobs, we had someone on the show a few weeks ago, a woman who worked for a housing association, who stood in an election in her borough in London on a ticket, well, not just on a ticket of supporting traditional marriage between a man and woman, but that was her stance on that particular issue. And she was sacked because of it. I didn't hear any politician speaking out in favour of that woman. So making the general comment and stand against wokeness is easy. The real hard thing is standing with individuals who suffer because of it. And that, I think, is where we find our politicians wanting, because they think they're going to be called nasty names on Twitter. They think it's going to affect their career prospects. A brave politician would have stood with that woman who we had on whose story we covered on the show, rather than making just a general comment about woke culture.
Arlene, I'm kind of really conscious that we get your thoughts on this, because the civil service take a bit of a bashing, particularly at the moment. But in your role as First Minister, you'll have worked very closely with kind of senior civil servants. Do you think there is a slightly sort of leftish woke tendency within the civil service, or do you think it's a little bit overrepresented?
Well, I think, again, generalisation is the wrong thing to do. Undoubtedly, there are those in the civil service who will have an agenda, like many in all walks of life, and they'll want to change the way the civil service does things to what they believe is the right way. But in general, most civil servants, and I find this to be absolutely the case, are only interested in doing the job that they're there to do, which is actually to serve the country in a neutral way, regardless of who their political masters are. They're there to advise. Some of the best civil servants I've worked with have been challenging civil servants because they're saying to you, Minister, I don't think that that's the right thing to do. And here are the reasons why I don't think it's the right thing to do. Now, you then have to make a decision as to whether, given what they've laid out in front of you, you should go ahead with what you think is the right thing to do or not. They're there to advise. They're not there to make the decisions. But I think there has grown up this culture now where we're targeting individual civil servants, which is wrong. But if there is this wokeism that is seeping into our institutions, and I think, sadly, that is the case, because leaders are saying we cannot take practical decisions because it might offend X, Y, and Z, when in actual fact that's not the case, and we're going to the nth degree when we don't need to, and in fact it's bad for the country. So we need to step back from all of this, and I've been encouraged by the fact that we're now challenging some of the ideology that has come in, particularly from Stonewall, and actually taking a step back from all of that. But I fundamentally agree with Paul. I mean, we can all be against wokeism. We can all say that we are anti-woke and we want to deal with all of these things. But when it comes to individual decisions, that's when the real test comes. You may not agree with something, but are you prepared to stand up for somebody and have their freedom of speech and thought protected? And that's the key element.
Absolutely. And we're going to be coming on to freedom of speech a little bit later when we talk about the terrible events surrounding Salman Rushdie as well. But let's focus on the leadership contest for one final segment, because this week, during GB News as the People's Forum, hosted by Alistair Stewart, Liz Truss was asked to outline her plans to compensate women who are demanding compensation because of the impact state pension equalisation had on them, the WASPI women as we know them. Let's have a quick listen to her response.
To be honest with you, and I have to be honest, on the specific case of the WASPI women, I don't think it was handled very well at the time. I completely admit that, and there wasn't enough respect shown. I very much agree with that. But I think where we are now, it will be very difficult to go back. I just don't want to make promises I can't keep, to be absolutely honest with you.
Arlene, that was a pretty candid response there from Liz Truss, you know, not just giving the woman who asked the question what she wanted to hear, saying she'd take it away and have a look. Do you think we need a bit more of that sort of candidness in politics?
Well, look, pensions and changing pensions is the most complicated issue, I think probably one of the most complicated issues in government. I was finance minister for a short period of time back in 2015, and I remember well looking at a pensions issue. I think it was in connection with RUC widows who remarried and lost their pension rights, and there was a lobby going on at the time to get those pension rights back. And when you look into not just that little issue, and I think it was only 100 women involved or something, but the consequentials of that then were absolutely enormous, because if you changed one part of the pension scheme, then it was going to have consequentials for others. I actually think it's been, I don't want to sound very Sir Humphrey-like and say it was a very brave answer, but it was a very brave answer, because she could have easily have said something along the lines of, oh, well, leave that with me and I'll come back to you after I'm in post, and all of that sort of. She knows that this is a very difficult issue to go back on. She doesn't want to raise expectations. So I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. And I've been struck, Diana, about the number of promises that have been made during this campaign, and sometimes you think, goodness, another promise, are we going to see that delivered? And I've become quite cynical about that for obvious reasons. But this is on one occasion where she absolutely did the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, do you think we need more of that? Because from my perspective, when a politician is very kind of clear and says no, if you ask them a question and they say no, I would usually respect that more, even if I disagree with them, than someone sort of floundering, saying, oh, email me, I'll take a look, and then getting a sort of waffly answer back.
Probably. I mean, I think Liz Truss is wrong on the substantive issue here. I think the WASPI women do have a legitimate case on the pension issue, and I think they've been served very badly. So I should be clear that I think she was wrong to say no, in the sense that they've got a justified case. But I do agree with the point that actually we do have, it seems to me, a generation of politicians who are petrified of saying no. actually. And I think part of the problem, and this I think touches on the previous discussion, is that if you get any particular interest group now making demands, and particularly if an interest group says if you don't concede to that demand, then you're discriminating against us, and shouts very loudly and claims offence, then more often than not, because they want an easy life, politicians will just go along with it. Rather than, as I say, finding themselves the subject of a Twitter storm and being called nasty names. So I do actually think politicians should say no more often to particular interest groups. I do think we need braver politicians who are prepared to put their head above the parapet. I just think on this occasion, she was wrong to say no. She said no to the wrong group of people.
Well, send us your thoughts. What did you make of Liz Truss's comments there? Is Rishi right to be building a swimming pool? And overall, what do you make of the whole leadership contest? Send us your thoughts on gbviews at gbnews.uk. But coming up after the break, we're discussing Sir Salman Rushdie, who was hospitalised after being attacked at an event in New York State on Friday. But as you know, we want to hear from you today, so do get involved. Tell us who you're backing in the Conservative leadership race and why. Email us gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. See you shortly.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. The author Sir Salman Rushdie was hospitalised after being attacked at an event in New York State on Friday. But this morning it was revealed that he's been taken off a ventilator and is now able to talk. It was reported the 75-year-old may lose an eye after being stabbed at least once in the neck and in the abdomen. Mr Rushdie published his fourth book called The Satanic Verses in 1988 and was forced into hiding after it sparked outrage amongst some Muslims, with Iran's supreme leader calling for his execution a year after the book's release. Leadership candidate Rishi Sunak has said the stabbing should be a wake-up call for the West. Now, Paul, what was your initial reaction to these events?
Horrific. It was an attack on freedom of thought. It's an attack on artistic expression. and it deserves, 100% condemnation. What I get annoyed about, Deanna, is in high-profile incidents like this, politicians have little choice but to say this is wrong. We must defend freedom of expression. We can't let these people defeat us. We can't let these people bully us. But actually, often we do allow ourselves to be bullied by it. And on perhaps less high-profile cases, politicians are often found standing on the sidelines rather than speaking out against protesters and against, frankly, fascists and theocrats who would like to suppress our freedom of speech and artistic expression. And I think, for example, of the school teacher in Batley, at Batley Grammar School. And I think the number of politicians who have condemned the treatment of that school teacher, who remains in hiding today, let's not forget, you could probably count on the fingers of one hand. I think of the attempts, which sadly were successful, I think in many cases, to censor a recent film, The Lady of Heaven, and to stop cinemas from showing that particular film. Because people claimed that they were offended, and mobs turned up to cinemas and demanded that the film not be shown. And again, politicians just stood aside and didn't really comment on that. And it only seems to me when it's a particularly high-profile incident like this, where commenting is unavoidable, that they stand up against it. And I would like to see people at the top of society, not just politicians, but commentators, people who have got influence, condemning these sorts of attacks on our freedom of expression and freedom of thought in more vociferous terms than they actually do. And the idea for me that any particular belief system, whether it's a religious belief system, a political belief system, whatever, should be ring-fenced from scrutiny or criticism. People should be able to say, look, this belief system is important to me. And therefore, you should not be allowed to criticise it. And if you do, I will take offence. And also, your life may be at risk. I think in a free society, or a society that claims to be free and to believe in the principles of liberty and free speech, I think is absolutely unconscionable. But we don't have people speaking out enough about it. And frankly, that needs to change.
I guess my question back to you, Paul, is kind of speaking out is one thing, but it goes back to what you said on the kind of anti-woke stuff earlier. Speaking out is one thing, but what kind of practical steps can be taken to really try and combat this? Because, the guy's been arrested, he is inevitably going to be, prosecuted and go to jail for it. But, what else can we do? Because it really is a culture war, isn't it?
Yeah, but on this point, we're not taking part in that culture war. We're letting the other side win that culture war. We're standing back and saying, OK, you claim offence and we won't offend you. You demand that we don't criticise a particular belief system, and fine, we won't do so. So pushing back against that, even if it's only, simply speaking up more often in relation to individual cases, like the Batley school teacher, for example. Organising counter-protests, actually. Counter-protests in favour of free speech and free expression. That in itself would be a start. I think we probably do need a wider debate about the whole issue of state-sponsored multiculturalism in this country. I think more and more people, including, I have to say, some people on the left, my political persuasion, are coming to the view that we haven't handled the whole multicultural issue particularly well, that actually we've created a salad bowl rather than a melting pot, as the saying goes, that actually the way that we've done it is to encourage separateness and difference between people rather than trying to build common bonds between people, and rather than trying to integrate people to the best of our ability. I think there's a much wider discussion to be had about that. But practically speaking up, I think, would be a start, and we need more people to do it. I mean, let me be clear, by the way. I'm not suggesting that it's a nice thing to do to go out and gratuitously insult somebody's faith. I'm not saying that you should do that just for the sheer hell of it, but actually if you have a particular view on a particular belief system, then you should be entitled to express that particular view. And actually in this case, when you think of the Satanic Verses, which was published in 1988, that was actually a book of fiction. I mean, that wasn't even an expression of Salman Rushdie's own particular ideology. And politicians, I think, I mean, I was a teenager at the time, but I remember politicians being quite equivocal even then. I mean, Roy Hattersley, who was a deputy leader of the Labour Party, called for the paperback edition of that book not to be published because it had caused offence. I mean, I think an appalling stance to take, to be honest. So we need more backbone in the debate, as we do in so many debates taking place at the moment.
So, Arlene, what was your reaction to these events, and do you agree with what Paul was saying there?
Well, I largely do, absolutely. I mean, I think for a lot of us who are people of faith, we do feel constantly under attack now by some of the woke issues that we were talking about earlier on. But that should never in any way lead to the sort of action which took place in New York State against Sir Salman Rushdie. I mean, the sad thing was as well, apparently a couple of weeks ago, he said that, the fatwa was a long time ago and you know, his life was relatively normal now. And then this happens out of the blue. But of course, we know that whilst the government in Iran may not have been actively promoting the fatwa, very recently, I think it was 2019, it was confirmed to still be in place. So you're always going to be in a position then where someone who takes his religion very seriously, probably to a fanatical point of view, takes that up and takes action upon it. And it's interesting, I think, going back to the Tory leadership campaign, that Rishi Sunak has indicated today that he thinks that Iran should be sanctioned over this issue. It'll be interesting to see where that discussion goes to, Deanna. But generally, I think that the balance of freedom of speech, whether you're a person of faith and you want to evangelize in that particular way, or whether you criticize people of faith and their faith systems, the balance has got completely out of sync. And I think we do need a wider discussion about freedom of speech and the need to protect it from whatever area you're coming from. And I think that when something tragic like this happens, it sometimes acts as a catalyst. I'm just really relieved that he seems to be making somewhat of a recovery, although for a man of 75 years of age to have suffered such an attack is obviously going to have long-term implications for him.
Absolutely, and we do wish him a full and speedy recovery here at GB News. Now, a Times investigation has found that various universities around the country have started removing books from their reading lists to protect students from challenging content and have applied trigger warnings to more than 1,000 texts. English students at Aberdeen University have been told that they can opt out of discussions on medieval writing, as the course sometimes entails engagement with topics that students may find emotionally challenging. Essex University has removed the Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead because of depictions of slavery. And these are just a few examples of what we've been seeing. Well, joining us now to discuss this story further is the Director of Academics for Academic Freedom, Professor Dennis Hayes. Dennis, just tell us your overall thoughts on this story. It's a bit mad, isn't it?
Well, I first came across trigger warnings in 2014. A very well-known article by the British-American journalist Jenny Jarvie. It was actually called Trigger Happy. It was published in the New Republic. And she made the point then that they were banning books that people found difficult. There were people being hypersensitive to students. And she tracks it back, actually, that trigger warnings were originally given for people surfing lonely on the internet. And in case they came across something that they might find uncomfortable, trigger warnings were there. And she and others said, well, will this apply to universities? Because you're not alone. You've got your students, you've got academics, you can all debate and discuss. And I was just looking back at the history, and later on that year, people said, this will never apply to universities. You know, trigger warnings have become meaningless. And I can't count the number of times I've been asked to write or comment on trigger warnings. So I thought, what's actually happening? And what is interesting is not so much the article, but what the responses to it are. And 3 clear responses came out. The first one was, well, it's only a few books. So it just ban a few books, so that's not a problem. The second one was, and I think Mary Beard said this, oh, it's just a curriculum review. We're just changing a few books. And the third response, particularly about trigger warnings, is there's nothing wrong with this. This is what we all do. All our lecturers put trigger warnings and suggest things to students. And it made me think that, why has it come up again, trigger warnings? Because it's not news. These things have been going on, and the Times did that bit of research. But it tells me that something's different now. And I think it's what's happened to the whole structure of universities has changed. You know, you've heard me say before, they've adopted a therapeutic culture. We're working towards a therapeutic university. And I do think this relates to the Rushdie case, because on the 25th anniversary of the fatwa, I did a big debate here in Derby with 5 or 6 speakers, and I got a quote from Kenan Malik, a great writer on race, And he said the trouble with academics and cultural figures is they've absorbed the fatwa, they've internalised the fatwa. They've internalised it. So they naturally censor. Now, I think, I was listening to your calls for free speech and challenging it, but I don't think you're going to be able to do it unless you recognise the fundamental problem. And when we're in a therapeutic culture where you're too sensitive to what you think are the students' feelings, that you protect them. And back in 2014, people were saying this will flatten the university experience for students. They will only get certain text and safe text. And I can give you an example about how thorough this is, because every single lecturer in every university, under the pretext of decolonising the curriculum, is looking at every book that they're using and every subject. And what happens then is not that you choose the best books, or the best books by authors of colour. For instance, Frederick Douglass, C.L.R. James, Thomas Sowell, the right-wing thinker who never gets mentioned, or Keenan Malik himself, and many others are great. But that's not what happens. What happens is woke books get put in, books about identity politics, your lived experience. So what is really happening is, in that therapeutic culture, there's a real challenge to free speech, because only one view is going to be heard, and that's the view that never upsets anybody. And I have a really funny example. I've got a friend who's in her 80s and she goes to a book club, and they asked her to choose a book that was really powerful and full of emotions. And I can't remember which one she chose, actually. It might have been Miss Julie. But they then complained that it was too emotional. It was too upsetting. And I think that's what happens to students. People think they can't cope with real emotions. Empathy and sympathy, but passion, jealousy, anger, really important emotions. I've been motivated by jealousy a lot of my life. Those emotions are not allowed.
Do get involved in these discussions too, so definitely do send us your thoughts. Well, coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the summer of discontent with yet more rail strikes disrupting the country.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Radio presenters can sometimes upset their audiences, and one presenter who may have done just that is LBC's James O'Brien. Many manual labourers listen to his show, but they may be switching off in future after he told them his job was harder than theirs. Take a listen.
I think this job is harder than manual labour. The producers just texted me to say, have you ever done manual labour, James? To which the answer is yes. Shows how much attention you pay to the programme you produce. I spent 2 weeks on a building site in South Yorkshire in 1988. I think there's a blue plaque up on the outdoor toilet that I helped build. It wasn't an outdoor toilet, it's like an extension on it. I think that is an unassailable position. You could not do what I do for 8 hours a day, but you can do manual labour for 8 hours a day. And let's just say that we'd be equally tired at the end of the shift.
So, Paul, you've worked very hard as a fireman and also now, to some extent, as a broadcaster as well. Give us your view. Which is the tougher gig?
How to win friends and influence people, James O'Brien.
Absolutely.
I mean, I suspect. I mean, I don't know. I suspect some of those comments were tongue-in-cheek, and I think our media today is such that. I think because there's so much competition, I think individual radio presenters and TV presenters are looking for the next best way to shock people, to gain their attention. And they often do that by saying controversial things. But, I mean, to answer your point directly, I mean, it is... I've worked in the fire and rescue service, still do, of course, and particularly if you look at some of what the emergency services are doing at the moment in terms of the wildfires, then it's really no contest for me. You know, we're sitting here, Deanna, in a nice, warm, cosy studio, and we're having great fun, and it's all very enjoyable. But, you know, there are people out there who are working on building sites. There are people working in factories and warehouses and in the gig economy, and, as I said, in the emergency services. I think it's a little bit presumptuous to suggest that doing a broadcasting job... I'm not saying broadcasting is easy, by the way. It's not. There's obviously a lot of effort involved in that too. But I would not, as a broadcaster, dream of suggesting that it's harder than some of the work that some people are doing, often for much less pay. Not you know, let's not forget that.
Arlene, I can see you smiling there. I'm curious for your view on what you think the reaction would be if it was a politician who said that versus a broadcaster.
Well, you can imagine, can't you, Deanna? I would advise you not to do it if you're thinking of doing it.
Solid advice, thank you.
Yeah, solid advice. I mean, this was obviously meant to shock and to get him a headline because when you see some of our young men and women out working in heats of 34, 35 degrees on building sites, keeping our water systems going, keeping our sewage systems going, and that's supposed to be easier than sitting in an air-conditioned studio and pontificating. I mean, it's a nonsense, obviously. And actually, I think he will have annoyed a lot of those people. But, you know, a bit like the Ryanair strategy, you annoy people to get their attention. And clearly that's what he's doing.
And I'd say, I think as well, in terms of broadcasting, in some respects, what we're doing there is the easier end of it. The people who do the really hard graft, as we know...
It's the guys back there. It's the guys in the gallery.
Who build the show and book the guests and do everything else. You see them working all the hours God sends, and you understand who does the tougher job. And I suspect it's probably the same for James O'Brien. His young production team are probably working far harder than he is, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, send us your thoughts. What do you reckon? Especially we want to hear from manual labourers. What do you think? Is your job easier than being a radio presenter? Let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, a 24-hour strike by train drivers across 9 operating companies left large parts of Britain without services yesterday. And the ASLEF union warned that striking drivers were here for the long haul. The action is the first in a week of strikes by 4 separate transport unions that will severely disrupt rail services nationwide from this coming Thursday. Paul, these strikes seem to be coming again and again. So is that an indication that the industrial action isn't working?
No, I think it was always inevitable that it was going to take a series of strikes before there's any shift. Governments don't obviously give in easily to strikes, particularly Conservative governments. So I don't think any trade union leader or member was under the illusion that they would just have to strike for a few hours and the government or the employers, the rail operators, whatever, would just cave in. I mean, I suspect we probably are in for a summer and possibly a winter of discontent. And as we touched on in the previous discussion, Deanna, it's simply because I think millions of workers have just had enough, frankly. They're just sick and tired, as I've said on the show before, of being told that they have to pay the price for an economic crisis that was not of their making. And, you know, even though in some quarters they're being criticised for demanding pay increases that are either level with inflation or above inflation, actually they're not. In most cases, all they're actually seeking is a pay increase which is less than inflation, more than what the employers have offered them, but in many cases still less than inflation, which will mean even then that they would be taking a real terms pay cut. And you just have to wonder, how long should people have to put up with this for? You know, we had a decade of austerity or more after 2008, the global financial crisis. We've now got a cost of living crisis. We're expecting energy bills to go up again in October. A recent survey which was published in The Guardian showed that next year people may have to contribute 2 months' worth of wages just simply to pay their energy bills. And people are just fed up with that. I think we need a brand new economic model for this country. I don't think any politician is really discussing seriously what that model should be, including the two Tory leadership contenders. I think for as long as that status quo remains, that where we do see wealth increasingly shoveled into the hands of the rich, and ordinary people are told that they have to pay the price. Bearing in mind, directors' pay, even during this cost of living crisis, is going up. City bonuses are still going up, and ordinary workers are being told you have to accept a slashing of your living standards. It's not a sustainable situation, I don't think, for any civilised country. And what we're seeing through the unions is a reaction to that, and that's obviously why I stand with them.
Mm-hmm. Arlene, I'm curious for your thoughts, because I think one of my concerns is that there is a danger that if these wage rises go ahead for all of the different striking industries, that it could actually add to the inflation issue, which is, of course, is affecting everyone right across society. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that is absolutely the case. But I mean, apart from that, I think that these strikes have become very politicised, if you listen to some of the leaders now speaking. And of course, politically, there is an agenda to move to more nationalisation, which of course would be really, really bad for the nation as a whole. We've seen the way in which it has been working in Scotland. I refer to it often, but I refer to it again. The ferries were nationalised in Scotland, and we've seen the absolute disaster that has occurred there. So it has become very political. And I think the sad thing is that, yes, Paul's right. There have been reasons why there have been difficulties in the economy, not least recently because of what happened in relation to COVID. But if we want the economy to move forward, we all have to play our part. And I know that Paul will reject that and say that it's not the workers' fault and they are the people that are bearing the brunt of the pain. But if we are to make the economy grow again, if we're to move forward, then we all have to work together to do that. And you can't just separate the workers out from the rest of the economy. We all have to take a bit of pain in order to move forward and to get to a place where we all want to be, so that we can all benefit from growth in the future. And I think, unfortunately, that's not where we are at the moment. Secondly, I do want to say I understand that Greg Hand, on behalf of Rishi Sunak's campaign this morning, has been talking about energy and policies and the need to look at security of supply. I welcome that, because I think up until now the discussion around energy has been largely focused on cost, has been largely focused on the mix of energy sources, and undoubtedly there is a need to look at the mix of energy sources, because we've been shying away from nuclear, we've been shying away from things that we should have been dealing with. But the security of supply issue is where the most vulnerable part of this comes. And because of what's happening in Ukraine, we have now suffered as a result of that. So there is a real need now to look at security of supply. And it should have been done 10 years ago. There's no doubt about that. And there's this Nick Clegg video going around where he said, oh, there's no point in looking at nuclear back in 2010 because it'll take to 2021, 2022 before it comes online. Yeah, well, we wish you had done that, Nick, because then we might not have been in the situation that we're in today.
Absolutely. I think it's this thing, isn't it, where all too often, unfortunately, I think as politicians, you get drawn into thinking in 5-year cycles and what can you deliver before that next election. And obviously with energy, it's simply not possible. You need those longer term strategies, which I think is what Greg Hands was kind of talking about this morning. Paul, I'm going to let you bounce back in there to Arlene, directly addressing you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the inflation point, I think the difference here is inflation is not being driven by wage demands. Actually, wage increases in this country over the last 10 years have been very, very low. We've seen inflation as a result of what's happening with the opening up of the economy after the pandemic, supply chain issues, the war in Ukraine, and so on. And I think the danger is actually, if you don't put money in people's pockets, we are going to head into recession. And I think, that is clearly the forecast. And once you're into recession, they're very difficult to get out of. And then we see businesses closing, we see people being laid off, and all of the problems that go with that. So I think the important thing is to get wage rises into people's pockets, to get them spending, to try to head off a recession, but nobody seems to have any idea about how to go about that, and I think that's a failure on the part of our politicians.
And Paul, I guess one of the points I ask you very often is, do you really think the unions have got the people on side, particularly when it comes to things like rail strikes? We might see Royal Mail strikes as well. You know, these are things that really impact people on their day-to-day lives, trying to commute to work, get to hospital appointments, whatever it might be. Do you think sometimes the unions go too far and really struggle to pull people on and support their causes?
Well, I think, interestingly, the polling shows on this in relation to the rail strikes that there's quite a bit of sympathy out there, and probably more sympathy than people would have anticipated, because, you know, the RMT does come in for a lot of criticism, but actually I think they've put their case very well in the media. I think Mick Lynch, the General Secretary, has put the case very well, and when you see interviews with passengers on TV and radio, you actually hear that they do have some sympathy for the cause of the rail workers, and I think people know that they're in that position themselves, actually, that they themselves are struggling, that they themselves are watching the pennies because of the pressures on their own finances. So they see people fighting back and they're inclined to support them.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, the UK is looking rather warm across England and Wales. Further north, heavy rain and thunderstorms will move across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here's a closer look. A dry end to the day across southwest England with some late warm sunshine. There could be the odd shower, but most places will stay dry. A warm and dry evening's expected in the southeast with some hazy sunshine to end the day. Temperatures will linger in the mid-20s. Most parts of Wales will stay dry this evening with some sunny spells. However, there could be the odd shower later in the day. It'll be a balmy evening across the Midlands with some warm, hazy sunshine. After a hot day, temperatures will stay in the mid-20s throughout the evening. Plenty of sunny spells to end the day across northern England, and it'll feel rather warm. Skies will be a little cloudier along the northeast coast. Thundery showers will continue across Scotland this evening, bringing heavy downpours of rain. Showers will be hit and miss with some drier spells in between. It should be mostly dry and a mostly dry end to the day across Northern Ireland with some bright spells. However, the odd heavy shower is possible. Thunderstorms will continue in the north overnight, staying largely dry and warm elsewhere with a few showers moving into the west after midnight. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful